On my daughter's birthday, she took me to a room and said, "Stay here until everyone leaves. You embarrass me." I waited in silence. When the guests were gone, I left an envelope on the table. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. Stay here until everyone leaves. You're embarrassing me. My daughter Mila's words cut through me like a knife as she practically shoved me into my bedroom. I stood frozen watching her close the door, leaving me alone in the growing darkness. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses from her birthday party drifted upstairs, a cruel reminder of my exclusion. I'm Denise, 68 years old, and this is the home I bought 30 years ago after my husband died. The home where I raised Mila by myself, working 2 jobs to keep us afloat. And now I was locked away like a shameful secret. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands trembling slightly. This wasn't the first time, but something about tonight felt different. More final. Perhaps it was the cold determination in Mila's eyes when she grabbed my arm after I'd mentioned her childhood nicknames to her colleagues. Or maybe it was how she'd introduced me earlier. This is Denise. Not this is my mother. 3 years ago, when Mila and Greg lost their house due to financial difficulties, I offered them a place to stay. "Just until we get back on our feet, Mom," Mila had promised with that smile that always melted my heart. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and before I knew it, my home wasn't mine anymore. First it was small things. My favorite armchair was moved to the basement because it didn't match the aesthetic Mila wanted for the living room. My cooking schedule was adjusted because Greg preferred to eat later. My garden, once my pride and joy, was redesigned without my input because Mila thought it looked outdated. Then came the bigger changes. My friends stopped visiting because Mila made them feel unwelcome. My routines were disrupted because they were inconvenient. My opinions were dismissed because they were old-fashioned. Slowly, I was being erased from my own home. Tonight was Mila's 42nd birthday. I'd spent the morning baking her favorite lemon cake, the same one I'd made for every birthday since she was 5. When I brought it out, she took one look at it and said, "Oh, Mom, I ordered a gourmet cake from that new bakery. This looks homemade." The party was filled with Mila's colleagues and new friends, people who looked through me as if I were invisible. I tried to join conversations, only to have Mila swoop in and steer people away. I offered to help serve drinks, but Greg told me to just relax, code for stay out of the way. Then came the moment that led me here, sitting alone in my bedroom while the party continued without me. I'd been talking to a young woman who actually seemed interested in hearing about Mila as a child. I mentioned how Mila used to call butterflies flutterbies, until she was 8, a memory I treasured. Mila's face turned to stone. She grabbed my arm, fingers digging in painfully, and hissed, "Can I speak with you upstairs?" Before I could respond, she was pulling me away, up the stairs and into my bedroom. "What are you thinking, telling embarrassing stories about me to my boss?" she snapped. "These are important people, Mom. They don't want to hear your silly little anecdotes. Just stay here until everyone leaves. You're embarrassing me." Sitting in the growing darkness, I could hear the party reaching its peak downstairs. Laughter, music, the occasional burst of applause. My exclusion was complete. I walked to my dresser and opened the top drawer, pushing aside neatly folded scarves until my fingers found what I was looking for. A folder containing the deed to my house. The house that was still in my name. For 3 years, I'd endured the slow erosion of my dignity. For 3 years, I'd watched my daughter and her husband take over my home, treating me like an unwelcome guest. For 3 years, I'd told myself that family comes first, that Mila needed my help, that things would get better. But tonight, something inside me broke. Or perhaps it was something inside me finally healing, straightening, finding its strength again. I took out the folder and placed it in a simple envelope. When everyone left, I would leave it on the table for Mila to find. It was time for things to change. I heard a burst of laughter from downstairs, Mila's laugh bright and clear. Once that sound had been my greatest joy. Now it reminded me of how far we'd drifted apart. How the daughter I raised had become someone who could lock her mother away during a party. I wiped away a single tear and squared my shoulders. I might be locked in this room tonight, but I wouldn't be silenced anymore. As I sat in my bedroom, listening to the muffled sounds of Mila's party below, my mind drifted back through the decades of sacrifice that had defined my life as a mother. I was only 38 when Robert died. A heart attack so sudden it left no time for goodbyes. One moment we were planning a summer vacation. The next I was a widow with a 10-year-old daughter and a mountain of medical bills. The insurance barely covered the funeral. I still remember Mila's face at the service, confused and scared. "Who's going to take care of us now, Mommy?" she had asked. I had pulled her close and whispered, "I will, baby. I'll always take care of us." And I did. I sold our bigger house and bought this smaller one. I took a second job working nights at the hospital cafeteria in addition to my day shifts as a receptionist. My hands cracked and bled from the industrial cleaning solutions, but I never complained. I saved every extra penny for Mila's future. When Mila needed braces, I sold my wedding ring. When she wanted dance lessons, I picked up weekend shifts. When college applications came around, I cashed in the small retirement fund Robert had left. Everything I had, everything I was, became invested in Mila's happiness and success. And for a while she seemed to appreciate it. I remember her handmade Mother's Day cards. "To the best mom in the world. Thank you for everything you do. I love you to the moon and back." I kept every single one, tucked away in a box beneath my bed. The change happened so gradually I barely noticed it. First came college, where my calls went increasingly unanswered. Then her first job in the city, where visits became rare. I told myself it was normal. She was building her own life. I was proud of her independence, even as I ate dinner alone night after night. When she met Greg 10 years ago, I hoped he might bring her back into my life. He seemed kind enough, if a bit too concerned with appearances. They had a lavish wedding that stretched my savings to the breaking point, but I didn't mind. Nothing but the best for my baby girl, I told myself. But after the wedding, the distance only grew. Holidays became brief, obligatory visits. My phone calls were met with impatient sighs. My advice was dismissed as outdated. The daughter who once looked at me with adoration now looked through me with barely concealed annoyance. 3 years ago, when they lost their house, I thought perhaps it was a blessing in disguise. Maybe having them here would rebuild our bond. Maybe Mila would remember who had always been there for her. I was wrong. Last month I overheard Mila on the phone with a friend, standing in my kitchen. The kitchen I had lovingly maintained for decades. "It's exhausting dealing with Mom," she had said, voice low but not low enough. "She's getting so confused lately. Always in the way, always bringing up the past. Greg thinks we should look into assisted living options, but those places are so expensive." I had frozen in the hallway, a physical pain blooming in my chest. Confused? I was perfectly lucid. The only thing confusing was how my own daughter could speak about me with such coldness. Later that week, I found brochures for assisted living facilities tucked into Mila's desk drawer when I was looking for stamps. The facilities looked nice enough in the glossy photos, but the prices were astronomical. Far more than my modest savings could cover. Unless, of course, they sold my house. Greg occasionally showed me small kindnesses, bringing me tea, asking about my day. But even his gentle nature was no match for Mila's domineering presence. When she entered a room, his spine seemed to soften, his voice grow quieter. Whatever guilt he felt was overridden by his desire to keep the peace. I ran my hand over the envelope containing the deed to my house. I had worked so hard for this home, making double mortgage payments whenever possible, finally paying it off 10 years ago. It was my security, my legacy, the one thing I could truly call my own. And now, as I sat locked in my bedroom while my daughter celebrated without me, I realized what I had been too blind to see. My sacrifices hadn't created gratitude, they had created expectation. The more I gave, the more Mila assumed she deserved. The more I provided, the more she took for granted. The bedroom door opened suddenly, letting in a sliver of light from the hallway. Greg stood there, his face a mask of discomfort. "Denise? Can I bring you anything? A drink maybe?" he asked, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "No thank you, Greg," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I'm fine up here." "I'm sorry about all this," he muttered, shifting his weight. "Mila just gets. You know how she gets when she's entertaining." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Greg lingered for a moment longer, then closed the door, leaving me once again in darkness. From downstairs came the sound of Mila's laugh, bright, carefree, the center of attention. Once that laugh had been my greatest joy. Now it reminded me of all I had given, and how little I had received in return. I placed the envelope on my nightstand and turned on my small bedside lamp. The party would end eventually. The guests would leave. And then finally it would be time for me to make a stand. I wouldn't be locked away in silence anymore. The party downstairs had finally wound down. I heard car doors slamming, engines starting, voices calling goodbyes. After 2 hours of confinement, I was stiff from sitting in the same position, my back aching against the wooden headboard. I waited another 30 minutes, listening to the sounds of Mila and Greg cleaning up, before I dared to open my bedroom door. The house was quiet now, just the faint hum of the dishwasher breaking the silence. I crept down the stairs, the envelope containing the deed clutched in my hand. But as I reached the bottom step, I heard Mila and Greg talking in hushed voices in the kitchen. I froze, not wanting to confront them yet. "I can't believe you let her talk to your boss," Greg was saying, his voice tinged with exasperation. "You know how she gets with those old stories." "It was humiliating," Mila replied sharply. "Janet doesn't need to hear about my childish mispronunciations. Mom doesn't understand how these things affect my professional image." I stood perfectly still, my heart hammering in my chest. Was that really how Mila saw me? As a liability to her image? "Maybe locking her in her room was a bit much," Greg said, his voice gentler now. "She seemed pretty upset." "Oh please," Mila scoffed. "She's fine. She probably enjoyed the quiet. Besides, we need to start setting firmer boundaries if we're going to move forward with our plans." "Plans? What plans?" I inched closer to the kitchen door, careful to avoid the creaky floorboard near the hallway table. "I still don't feel right about this," Greg said, his voice dropping even lower. "It's her house, Mila. She worked hard for it." "It's our house now," Mila replied firmly. "We've been living here for 3 years. Besides, she can't maintain it anymore. You've seen how she neglects things." My blood ran cold. Neglects things? I still cleaned every week, tended my remaining garden plants, kept everything in perfect order, despite Mila constantly rearranging my systems. "The retirement community brochures you showed me." Greg hesitated. "They're pretty expensive. That's why we need to sell this place," Mila said, as if explaining something to a child. "The house will easily fetch enough to cover her care for years and give us a down payment on something newer. Something that actually reflects our status." I felt my knees weaken. They were planning to sell my home, and use the money for both a retirement facility for me and a new house for themselves, without even discussing it with me. "She won't agree to it," Greg said, voicing my exact thoughts. "You know she loves this place." "She doesn't have to agree," Mila replied, and the coldness in her voice sent shivers down my spine. "I've been talking to a lawyer. If we can establish that she's no longer capable of managing her affairs, we can get power of attorney." "Incapable? Mila, your mom is sharp as a tack." "Is she though?" Mila's voice took on a calculating tone that I'd never heard before. "She's been forgetting things lately. Getting confused. At least, that's what Dr. Brennan will hear at her next checkup." I pressed my hand against my mouth to stifle a gasp. My own daughter was planning to have me declared incompetent, to steal my home out from under me. "I don't know about this," Greg said, and I felt a brief surge of gratitude toward my son-in-law. "It feels wrong." "What's wrong is watching this house, which is worth a small fortune in today's market, sit here wasting away when we could be using that equity," Mila snapped. "Mom will be fine. She'll have round-the-clock care, activities, friends her own age. It's better for everyone." I'd heard enough. Moving as quietly as possible, I retreated back up the stairs, careful to avoid the spots that creaked. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the envelope. Back in my room, I closed the door silently and sank onto my bed, trying to process what I just heard. My own daughter was plotting against me, planning to have me declared incompetent, planning to take my home. The bedroom suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in around me. This wasn't just about being embarrassed at a party or having my opinions dismissed. This was about my future, my security, my very autonomy. I looked down at the envelope in my hands. The deed to my house. The house I had sacrificed so much to keep. The house that Mila now saw as nothing more than an asset to be liquidated. Through my window, I could see the old oak tree in the backyard, The one I'd watched grow from a sapling over the past 30 years. How many summer afternoons had I spent reading beneath its branches? How many autumn mornings had I spent raking its leaves while Mila jumped in the piles, her laughter echoing through the yard? Those memories meant nothing to Mila now. I meant nothing to her now. Just an obstacle to be managed, a problem to be solved. Tears spilled down my cheeks, but I wiped them away quickly. This was no time for self-pity. I needed to think, to plan, to protect myself from my own child. I slipped the envelope under my mattress for safekeeping. Leaving it on the table tonight as I'd planned would only tip my hand. I needed time to figure out my next move. One thing was certain. I couldn't trust Mila anymore. The daughter I had raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally was gone. In her place was a stranger who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. As I lay in bed that night, sleep eluding me, a strange calm settled over me. The shock and hurt were still there. But something else had emerged from the ashes of my trust, determination. They thought I was weak, helpless, easy to manipulate. They were wrong. The next morning, I awoke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. While Mila and Greg slept, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, planning my next moves. I needed to be smart, methodical, and above all discreet. First, I needed to secure my financial independence. After breakfast, I told Mila I was going to my weekly book club. Her distracted nod of acknowledgement, not even looking up from her phone, was actually a blessing. She had no interest in my social life, which meant she wouldn't question my movements. Instead of the library, I drove to see Martin Fisher, the attorney who had handled my husband's estate decades ago. His office was in the same small building downtown, though his hair had gone completely white since I'd last seen him. "Denise Carpenter," he said warmly, rising from behind his desk to greet me. "It's been too long. How are you?" I settled into the chair across from him and took a deep breath. "I need your help, Martin. And I need complete confidentiality." His smile faded as I explained my situation: Mila and Greg moving in, the gradual erosion of my authority in my own home, and finally, the overheard conversation about selling my house and having me declared incompetent. Martin's expression darkened as I spoke. "This is elder abuse, Denise. Plain and simple. I don't want to press charges," I said quickly. "She's still my daughter. I just want to protect myself and what's mine." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The good news is, the house is still solely in your name. They have no legal claim to it whatsoever." "Could they really have me declared incompetent?" I asked, voicing my deepest fear. "Not without a thorough evaluation by multiple medical professionals," Martin assured me. "And from talking to you now, I can see you're as sharp as ever. But we should take precautions." By the time I left Martin's office 2 hours later, I had signed papers establishing a revocable trust for my assets, updated my will, and created a durable power of attorney, naming Martin, not Mila, as my representative should I ever become truly incapacitated. "This protects you," Martin said as he walked me to the door. "But Denise, you need to think about your living situation. It's not healthy or safe to stay with people who are plotting against you." I nodded, the weight of his words settling on my shoulders. "I know. I'm working on that part." My next stop was the bank, where I opened a new account at a different institution from the one Mila and I shared. I transferred half of my savings, a modest sum, but enough to give me a foundation. The teller gave me a curious look when I insisted on paper statements only, to be held at the bank for pickup, but she complied without question. Over the next 2 weeks, I executed my plan with quiet determination. I contacted a real estate agent, not the one Mila and Greg knew, and had her quietly scout apartments in a senior living community across town. Not a care facility as Mila had planned, but an independent living complex where I could have my own space while still enjoying community amenities. "It's lovely," the agent Barbara told me as we toured a sunny one-bedroom unit. "And they have a gardening club I think you'd enjoy." I could already picture myself there, making new friends, starting fresh. The apartment was small but perfectly laid out, with large windows overlooking a courtyard garden. The rent was manageable with my pension and Social Security. "I'll take it," I said, surprising even myself with my decisiveness. "When can I move in?" "The current tenant leaves at the end of the month. So about 3 weeks." 3 weeks to untangle 30 years of life in my home. Seemed impossible yet necessary. While Mila was at work, I began the painful process of sorting through my belongings, deciding what to keep and what to leave behind. I couldn't take everything. The apartment was less than half the size of my house, but there were treasures I wouldn't part with. Photo albums, Robert's watch, the quilt my grandmother had made. I worked systematically, packing a few items each day in bags I labeled as donations or storage. If Mila noticed, she didn't comment. She was too busy with her own life, her own plans. Greg, however, watched me with increasingly suspicious eyes. "Doing some spring cleaning?" he asked one afternoon, catching me wrapping my mother's china in newspaper. "Just organizing," I replied, keeping my voice casual. "This house could use a good purge." He seemed to accept my explanation, but I caught him studying me at dinner that night, his brow furrowed in thought. I would need to be more careful. The hardest part was maintaining normalcy. I smiled at breakfast, nodded at Mila's complaints about her colleagues, pretended nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Each dismissive comment, each interruption, each time she talked about me as if I weren't there. All of it stung with new intensity now that I knew her true intentions. "Mom seems distracted lately," I overheard Mila telling Greg one evening when they thought I was watching television. "Maybe we should move up her doctor's appointment." "She seems fine to me," Greg replied. "Just quiet." "That's not normal for her," Mila insisted. "She's usually chattering about something." The false concern in her voice made my stomach turn. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about her plans being delayed. The following week, Mila announced she was hosting another gathering. A dinner party for Greg's promotion at work. My heart sank at the news, memories of her birthday party still fresh in my mind. "I'd like you to join us, Mom," she said, surprising me. "Greg's boss is bringing his mother, and it would be nice to have another person from your generation there." The way she said "your generation" made it clear this was about appearances, not inclusion. Still, I nodded and smiled. I'd love to. This dinner party would be my last in this house. Though Mila didn't know it yet. My new apartment would be ready the following week. Martin had the papers prepared for the house, which would be put on the market, with the proceeds going into my trust, not Mila's pocket. Everything was in place. I just needed to make it through one more week without raising suspicions. One more week of silent planning before I could finally speak my truth. The Silent Room. Chapter 5: The Anniversary. The dinner party for Greg's promotion arrived with all the tension and expectation of a gathering storm. I spent the afternoon helping prepare, though helping mostly meant staying out of Mila's way as she transformed my home once again into a showcase I barely recognized. "Mom, could you please use the good china?" Mila asked, though her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. "And make sure the water spots are polished off the silverware." I nodded, quietly retrieving the dishes that had once been my mother's wedding gift to me. As I carefully wiped each piece, I wondered how many more times these plates would grace my table. Soon they would be packed away, moved to my new apartment. The thought brought both sadness and relief. Greg's boss, Richard Palmer, arrived first with his wife Karen and his mother, Eleanor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s who assessed the room with quiet dignity. I immediately felt a kinship with her. "What a lovely home," Eleanor commented as I took her coat. "Have you lived here long?" "About 30 years, I replied, guiding her to the living room. "Since my husband passed." "Ah, a widow too," she said with a knowing smile. "I lost my Harold 12 years ago. It changes you, doesn't it?" Before I could respond, Mila swooped in with practiced elegance. "Eleanor, I see you've met my mother. Mom, why don't you get Eleanor a drink while I show Karen the renovations we've done to the kitchen?" The dismissal was subtle but clear. I was to serve, not socialize. Eleanor caught my eye, a flash of understanding passing between us. Throughout cocktail hour, I moved quietly through the gathering, refilling glasses and offering appetizers. The other guests, Greg's colleagues and their spouses, barely acknowledged me. Their attention focused on Mila as she regaled them with stories of their recent vacation to the Bahamas. "It was simply divine," she gushed, gesturing with her wine glass. "Though Mom thought it was too expensive, didn't you, Mom? She's still so careful with money." All eyes turned to me, and I felt heat rise to my cheeks. The vacation had been expensive, unnecessarily so. And I had mentioned my concern only in private. Now Mila was using it to paint me as miserly and out of touch. I believe in living within one's means, I said mildly, refilling Eleanor's water glass. A lesson from a different generation, perhaps. Eleanor chuckled, the sound warm and approving. Wisdom often is, my dear. Mila's smile tightened fractionally. Well, we can't all live in the past. Speaking of which, Mom, didn't you say you needed to check on the roast? Another dismissal. I retreated to the kitchen, where Greg was arranging the serving dishes. You okay? He asked, his voice low. Mila's a little intense tonight. I'm fine, I assured him, though my hands trembled slightly as I checked the roast. Just tired. Dinner proceeded with excruciating slowness. Seated at the far end of the table, away from the main conversation, I watched as Mila held court. She spoke about my house, as if it were entirely hers, describing renovations she planned for the spring. The garden needs a complete overhaul, she told Karen. All those old-fashioned flowers aren't really our style. My heart clenched. Those old-fashioned flowers were heirloom roses I had tended for decades, some transplanted from my mother's garden before she died. I find great beauty in traditional gardens, Eleanor commented, directing her words to me rather than Mila. There's something to be said for things that have stood the test of time. I gave her a grateful smile. The roses bloom magnificently in June. Perhaps you'd like to see them then. A flash of annoyance crossed Mila's face. If they're still here. We're considering a more modern landscape design that requires less maintenance. The conversation moved on, but Eleanor continued to engage me directly, asking about my life, my interests, my opinions. Each time, Mila would interrupt or redirect, growing increasingly irritated by my participation. The breaking point came during dessert. Eleanor had asked about family photos displayed on the mantel, and I was telling her about a trip Robert and I had taken to Yellowstone the year before he died. It was our last big adventure together, I explained, lost in the bittersweet memory. Robert always wanted to see Old Faithful. He stood there mesmerized like a little boy watching fireworks for the first time. Mom, Mila cut in sharply. Nobody wants to hear these old stories. You're monopolizing Eleanor's attention. The table fell silent. Even Greg looked uncomfortable, staring down at his half-eaten cheesecake. Actually, Eleanor said, her voice gentle but firm, I find Denise's stories quite fascinating. Please continue. Mila's face flushed dark red. Mom has a tendency to ramble. Sometimes she forgets that not everyone shares her interest in the past. The implication was clear. She was laying groundwork for her claims about my mental state, planting seeds of doubt about my competence. I don't think it's rambling to share meaningful memories, Eleanor replied, setting down her fork with deliberate care. In fact, I find Denise remarkably articulate and engaging. Mila's jaw tightened. She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her wine glass. Mom, could you help me in the kitchen for a moment? I followed her, aware of the curious eyes tracking our exit. Once in the kitchen, Mila rounded on me, her voice a furious whisper. What do you think you're doing? This night is about Greg's promotion, not your sentimental trip down memory lane. I was just answering Eleanor's questions, I replied, keeping my voice level despite the anger building inside me. You're embarrassing me, Mila hissed. Again, just like at my birthday. Can't you see that no one wants to hear about Dad or your gardening, or whatever other boring details you think matter? Each word was a slap. I stared at my daughter, this stranger wearing Mila's face, and felt something inside me finally irrevocably break. I think you should go back to your guests, I said quietly. I'll finish clearing the dessert plates. Just stay in the background, okay? This is important for Greg's career. She swept back into the dining room, her hostess smile firmly in place. I followed more slowly, gathering empty plates with trembling hands. As I approached Eleanor to clear her dessert, she reached out and gently touched my wrist. Your daughter has a lovely home, she said, her emphasis on your daughter slight but unmistakable. But I suspect she doesn't fully appreciate its heart. I met her knowing gaze and felt tears threaten. She saw it all, the dismissals, the subtle undermining, the erasure of my presence in my own home. And in that moment of recognition I found strength. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. When the guests finally departed, Eleanor clasped my hands warmly. I've enjoyed meeting you immensely, Denise. Don't let anyone dim your light. After everyone left, Mila turned to me, her expression cold. Well, that could have gone better. Did you have to try so hard to be the center of attention? I didn't answer. I simply went upstairs to my room, closed the door, and pulled out the envelope containing the deed to my house. Tomorrow everything would change. Morning light filtered through my bedroom curtains as I finished packing the last of my personal treasures. Today was the day I reclaimed my life. I'd risen early before Mila and Greg were awake, and called a taxi to help with my first load of belongings. Barbara, my real estate agent, had arranged for the apartment to be available a few days early, and I'd been gradually moving small items there throughout the week. Now I stood in my bedroom, soon to be my former bedroom, and took a final look around. 30 years of memories resided within these walls. I wouldn't be taking the furniture. It would stay with the house. But I was taking what mattered most. Photographs, keepsakes, and the dignity Mila had tried so hard to strip away. I heard movement downstairs. Mila was up. Taking a deep breath, I picked up the envelope containing the deed and several other documents Martin had prepared, and made my way down to the kitchen. Mila stood at the counter, scrolling through her phone while waiting for the coffee maker to finish brewing. She glanced up as I entered, her expression distracted. "Morning, Mom," she said, returning her attention to her phone. "There's enough coffee for you if you want some." "Thank you, but I've already had tea," I replied, setting the envelope on the kitchen table. "Mila, we need to talk." Something in my tone must have alerted her. She looked up, really seeing me for the first time that morning. "What's wrong? And why are you dressed so early?" I sat down at the table, gesturing for her to join me. After a moment's hesitation, she did, bringing her coffee with her. "I've been doing a lot of thinking." I began, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. "About this house, about our living arrangement, about the future." Mila's expression sharpened with interest. "Actually, I've been wanting to talk to you about that too. Greg and I have some ideas." "I'm selling the house," I interrupted, pushing the envelope toward her. "The realtor will be listing it next week." Her coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "What? You can't be serious." "I'm very serious," I said. "I've already signed with an agent. I've also secured an apartment at Willow Creek Estates. I'll be moving in today." "Moving?" Mila's voice rose in disbelief. "Mom, what are you talking about? This is our home." "No, Mila. This is my home. The home I paid for, maintained, and cherished for 30 years. A home you and Greg were welcome to share temporarily, but which was never yours to claim." She stared at me, coffee forgotten. "I don't understand where this is coming from. We've been happy here, haven't we? A family." The audacity of her question nearly took my breath away. "Have we? Has this felt like family to you, Mila? Because to me it's felt like slow erasure. Like I've been disappearing bit by bit from my own life." "That's ridiculous," she scoffed, but a flicker of unease crossed her face. "If this is about the dinner party, or my birthday, you're being oversensitive. It's about much more than that," I said, opening the envelope and removing the stack of papers inside. "It's about the conversations you've had with Greg about selling my house and putting me in a care facility. It's about your plans to have me declared incompetent, so you could take control of my assets." Mila's face drained of color. You heard that?" "Yes, I heard it. Just like I've heard every dismissive comment, every whispered criticism, every plan made about my life without my input." Greg appeared in the doorway, drawn by the tension in our voices. "What's going on?" "Mom's lost her mind," Mila said, recovering quickly. "She's talking about selling the house and moving out." "Not talking about it," I corrected. "Doing it. The papers are signed, the apartment is leased, and most of my personal belongings are already there." Greg's eyes widened as he looked between us. "Denise, maybe we should all calm down and discuss this rationally." "We're past discussion," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "I've made my decision. You can't just throw us out." Mila protested, anger replacing shock. "Where are we supposed to go?" I slid another document across the table. "You and Greg have 60 days to find new accommodations. That's standard notice for tenants, which is what you've been, legally speaking. I've also arranged for the proceeds from the house sale to be placed in a trust, with a portion set aside for Emma's college fund. Emma was my granddaughter, Mila's daughter from her first marriage, now away at college. We'd always been close, despite Mila's efforts to limit our relationship. You're doing this to punish me, Mila said, her voice trembling with fury. After everything I've done for you. What exactly have you done for me, Mila? I asked quietly. Relegated me to the edges of my own home? Planned to have me institutionalized? Treated me like a burden rather than your mother? That's not fair. We took care of you. No, you took advantage of me. There's a difference. Greg sat down heavily, looking genuinely distressed. Denise, please. We can work this out. Whatever we've done to upset you, we can fix it. It's not about fixing anything anymore, I said, feeling a strange calm settle over me. It's about starting fresh. All of us. Mila stood up so abruptly her chair nearly toppled backward. You ungrateful old woman. After everything I've sacrificed. Sacrificed. The word hung between us, sharp and dangerous. Tell me, Mila, what exactly have you sacrificed? I gave up vacations to pay for your dance lessons. I worked nights to afford your college applications. I wore the same winter coat for 15 years so you could have new clothes each school year. Don't talk to me about sacrifice. My voice didn't rise, but the quiet intensity of my words seemed to stop her cold. The taxi will be here soon, I continued, gathering my papers back into the envelope. I've left a list of local apartment complexes on the refrigerator. Given your combined incomes, you should have no trouble finding something suitable. Mom, please, Mila said, her anger giving way to panic. You can't do this. This is our home. It was my home, I corrected gently. And now it will be someone else's. But home isn't just a building, Mila. It's respect. It's love. It's feeling valued rather than tolerated. Something I hope you'll learn before it's too late. The taxi horn sounded from the driveway. I stood, smoothing down my jacket. Goodbye, Mila. Goodbye, Greg. I wish you both well. I walked out the front door, not looking back even as Mila called after me. The taxi driver loaded my last suitcase into the trunk while I settled into the back seat. Willow Creek Estates, please, I told him. As we drove away, I watched my former house, recede in the rear window. There was sadness, yes, but also a lightness I hadn't felt in years. 6 months later, I sat on the balcony of my apartment, tending to potted roses transplanted from my old garden. The sale of the house had gone through smoothly, providing me with financial security I'd never expected in my later years. My new home was smaller but filled with warmth and new friendships, particularly with Eleanor Palmer, who had sought me out after that fateful dinner party and now lived just 2 floors below me. Mila hadn't spoken to me since the day I left, though Emma visited regularly, grateful for the college fund I'd established for her. Greg had called once, awkwardly but sincerely apologizing for his role in my mistreatment. They'd found an apartment across town, he told me, and Mila was struggling to adjust to their reduced circumstances. She misses you, he'd said hesitantly, though she'd never admit it. When she's ready to see me as a person, not a possession, I'd replied. My door is open. That day hadn't yet come, but I wasn't waiting anymore. My life had expanded in ways I'd never imagined. Weekly bridge games with Eleanor and our friends, a book club I'd helped organize, even a gentle flirtation with David, a retired professor who shared my love of gardening. The silent room where I'd once been confined was now just a memory, replaced by spaces filled with conversation, laughter, and respect. I'd lost a house but found a home. I'd lost a daughter but rediscovered myself. And in the quiet moments tending my roses or watching the sunset, I finally understood. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away, leaving nothing behind but an envelope on the table and the echo of a door closing on the past.